American Pickers didn't collapse the way most shows do. It didn't get pulled mid-season or buried quietly without explanation. It fell apart in full public view, piece by piece, while millions of loyal fans watched and couldn't do a thing about it. A friendship that had survived decades of backroads and junkyards broke open under the weight of surgery, silence, and ego. A network that had once championed the show turned its back the moment newer, cheaper content became available. And then, just when things appeared to stabilize, a drunk driver on a Tennessee road nearly took one of the show's last remaining pillars with him. This is the full story of what really happened to American Pickers and why the damage may already be permanent. When the show premiered on the History Channel in January 2010, it wasn't competing with scripted drama or flashy competitions. Mike Wolfe had built it around something quieter. Two guys in a van, driving the forgotten backroads of America, knocking on doors and digging through barns for objects that most people had written off as junk. Viewers connected with it immediately, not because of high production value, but because it felt genuinely unfiltered. Old gas signs, rusted bicycles, worn leather jackets from another era, every find carried the weight of a real life lived somewhere in America. Within a few seasons, the show had pulled in between 3 and 5 million weekly viewers, and Mike's antique shop, Antique Archaeology, became a tourist destination in its own right. That kind of cultural reach doesn't happen by accident, and none of it would have worked without the specific chemistry between three people. Mike Wolfe was the face, enthusiastic, driven, always chasing the next great find. Frank Fritz was his counterbalance, rough around the edges, funny in a way you couldn't script, and gifted at spotting pieces that other pickers would walk right past. Danielle Colby ran the operational side from the office and held the entire logistical structure together. None of them were performers in the traditional sense, and that's exactly what made the combination work. The audience wasn't watching characters. They were watching real people who genuinely liked each other, and that distinction is what turned American Pickers from a decent cable television show into something fans rewatched between new episodes. By season 21, cracks had formed that couldn't be plastered over. Frank began disappearing from episodes with no official explanation offered, and fans flooded social media demanding answers that neither the network nor Mike provided. Frank eventually broke his silence himself, and what he said shook the community hard. He claimed the show had shifted completely in Mike's direction, that his own contributions had been minimized to the point where he felt invisible despite being a co-creator of the show's entire dynamic. A childhood friendship of over 40 years, he said, had started feeling like a business arrangement where he sat at the bottom of the hierarchy. The situation worsened significantly in 2020 when Frank underwent major back surgery. Whatever tension had built between them by that point, Frank believed their history was enough that Mike would reach out during his recovery. Mike never called. No intermediaries, no messages sent through mutual contacts, nothing. That silence, Frank later said publicly, hurt more than any on-screen slight ever could, and that's when he stopped keeping the feud private. He gave interviews, posted openly about the breakdown of their friendship, and the fan base split down the middle almost overnight. A vocal portion of viewers announced they would stop watching until Frank was restored to his original role, while others accused Frank of airing grievances that belonged behind closed doors. Mike eventually released a statement expressing that he wished Frank well and hoped for a full recovery. Fans tore it apart immediately, calling it cold and corporate, the kind of language used in press releases rather than in conversations between people who had spent 15 years building something together. And that's when the online criticism of Mike intensified to a level that seemed to genuinely catch him off guard. His response revealed that Frank's struggles with opioid dependency and alcoholism, complications that followed the surgery, had been part of the reason he and the network were hesitant to bring Frank back to filming. Frank countered publicly, accusing Mike of using addiction as cover for a plan to replace him with Mike's own brother, Robbie Wolfe. Danielle, for her part, aligned quietly with Mike, which led fans to accuse her of betrayal, while others argued she was simply staying professional in a situation that had gone well beyond professional. Without Frank on screen, The show lost something it couldn't replace through casting or production tricks. The natural friction and warmth that had defined their dynamic on the road disappeared, and what remained felt rehearsed. New cast members brought no recognizable history, no established rapport, and viewers noticed within the first few episodes. The long-standing audience didn't migrate to new favorites within the show. They migrated away from it entirely, and ratings that had once held steady above 5 million dropped below 1 million. Network executives, who had already been watching the budget expand year after year due to travel costs, expert appraisals, and storage logistics, began reassessing whether American Pickers still made financial sense. The History Channel's internal priorities had already been shifting toward content that was faster to produce and easier on the budget, shorter formats, fewer cast members, minimal travel, and quick editing cycles. Shows like Pawn Stars Do America fit that model perfectly, and American Pickers, with its long road trips and leisurely pacing, no longer aligned with what the network wanted to spend money on. The show got quietly downgraded from headline status, moved around the broadcast schedule, stripped of aggressive promotion, and eventually disappeared from the spotlight on the network's own website and social pages. Mike reportedly pushed back against these changes, wanting to preserve the original format built around genuine human connection and real stories behind forgotten antiques. None of that mattered, because the decision-makers had already moved on. Advertisers followed the same direction. As ad revenue across cable television tightened industry-wide, brands chased audiences that were younger, more active online, and more responsive to digital campaigns. American Pickers had always skewed older, and while that audience was loyal, it wasn't generating the engagement metrics that modern advertisers required. Sponsorship deals that had once been reliable shrank year by year, which reduced funding further and strained production quality at precisely the moment when the show needed to invest more to stay competitive. YouTube clips from the show drew minimal traffic compared to other History Channel content, and the gap between American Pickers and the digital landscape it needed to occupy kept widening with no obvious way to close it. By 2024, the situation shifted into something far more personal. Frank Fritz suffered a stroke and passed away in September of that year, and Mike was reportedly at his side when it happened. A detail that underscored the complexity of what their relationship had actually been, fractured publicly, reconciled privately in May 2023, and ultimately grounded in something deeper than the disagreements that had played out in front of the audience. The History Channel aired tribute cards during the season 26 premiere and ran marathons of Frank's best episodes throughout October 2024. Mike dedicated the entire new season to Frank's memory and spoke in multiple interviews about what Frank had meant to the show, visibly emotional in a way that suggested the cold press release narrative had never told the full story. None of it reversed the trajectory. April 2025 brought the closure of Mike's antique archaeology store in Nashville, Tennessee, after nearly 15 years of operation. Mike framed it as a personal choice, driven by a desire to spend more time in LeClaire with his 81-year-old mother and his young daughter, stepping away from the relentless pace of managing multiple locations simultaneously. Fans read it as confirmation that the American Pickers era was ending, with speculation spreading quickly that financial difficulties or behind-the-scenes conflict had forced the closure, and the denial that followed did little to quiet that speculation. Then came September 12, 2025. Mike and his girlfriend, Letitia Klein, were driving a 1958 vintage Porsche through Columbia, Tennessee, a small town Mike had personally invested millions of dollars into revitalizing over several years, when a drunk driver in an SUV pulled out directly in front of them. The vintage Porsche carried none of the modern safety features that would have absorbed the impact. Mike gripped the steering wheel so hard during the collision that it broke under the force of his body, and Letitia later credited that reaction with keeping him from being impaled by the steering column, though she bore the brunt of the crash due to how he swerved. She was airlifted to Vanderbilt Medical Center in critical condition and spent 5 days hospitalized before beginning a series of follow-up procedures. Mike was released within 24 hours, but the psychological weight of the accident, layered on top of Frank's death and the store closure, clearly marked a turning point that went beyond professional setbacks. In a 2026 interview with People, Mike described the accident as the kind of event that permanently rearranges how you think about time and priorities. The other driver faced vehicular assault charges with legal proceedings still ongoing. American Pickers itself remains in extended hiatus, and while the History Channel and Mike Wolfe have both confirmed the show has not been officially canceled, Danielle Colby's public comments have fed ongoing speculation that production may never resume in any meaningful form. What the show's story ultimately represents is a collision of forces that rarely arrive all at once: a friendship that aged badly under the pressure of fame, a network that chose profit over loyalty, an audience that aged out of relevance in the advertising market, and a host whose personal life absorbed one loss after another in rapid succession. Whether American Pickers returns or quietly fades into reality television history, the version that earned 3 to 5 million weekly viewers, the one built on back roads and real human chemistry, is already gone.